The CABE 2019 annual conference would not be possible, and we would not be here today without the generous support of our sponsors. Please join me in thanking our diamond-level sponsors, the Sobrado Family Foundation and SEAL, and our platinum-level sponsors, Google, Latino 24/7 Media Group, and Velázquez Press. Let's thank them with a big CABE round of applause.
Now, let's welcome CABE Board Region 1 Representative, Annie BichLoan Duong.
I am very honored and excited to introduce to you today our keynote, Bao Phi. He's an award-winning poet and children's book author, and best of all, he's my brother. Well, not really, but in a way he is. Have you ever traveled outside of the country or even your state and you met someone who from your country, and it's just like the person is your long-lost relative, your best one that you've never seen a long time. And that is how I felt about Bao. His name is Phi Thiên Bao. And I talked to him and I said, wow, that is a beautiful name. It sounds like royal. And he said, well, my family is poor, but probably my parents are very romantic. That's why I got that name. So anyway, Bao is a poet. His poems represent us, speak to us. Not only his poem get me to remember our time in Vietnam, but speak to us, those of us who are Vietnamese-American, Vietnamese-Chinese-American, who came to this country, who has to escape our country from communists to come here. So without further ado, please join me in welcome our keynote, Phi Thiên Bao.
Thank you so much, Annie. We are related. I'm sure we're related somehow. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your morning with a poet, although it might not be your choice. That's quite understandable. I really want to thank CABE for allowing me to be here. It's really special for me to be here, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yay, yay! And I want to thank Annie for that beautiful introduction, and also Ramona and Angel, the two poets who went before me. Thank you for sharing their poems. And can we just give a hand to the organizers? A conference like this takes an enormous amount of work, and if we could just give them a hand for bringing us all together today. Thank you. I have to tell you, being here with you is a little bit bittersweet. I grew up in a bilingual family, but I lost my bilingualness. I was born in Vietnam just a few months before my family had to flee from the war. My father was a soldier. My mother worked in a snack bar at a school in Saigon. I was 3 months old. They were shelling the airport, trying to kill as many of us as possible as we tried to escape. My father said he saw literally planes full of Vietnamese people being lit up in flames again and again and again. And so we were in a bomb shelter thinking the same thing would happen to us, but hoping and waiting for a chance to try to escape. And my father was sure that it would happen to us, but it didn't. And somehow we made it here to America. And so with many other families, we were in a bomb shelter waiting for our chance, and I guess they said no one could sleep in that bomb shelter because for all night they were shelling the airport and it was shaking. And I was a baby. I was 3 months old in the arms of my family. And evidently, I didn't cry, didn't make any noise, wasn't scared. Which is really funny because I've grown up to be an adult man who's afraid of everything and I won't shut up. We went from that to Minneapolis's largest, poorest, and most racially diverse neighborhood. You have to understand that back then in Minnesota, Southeast Asian families, refugees like mine, were the first large Asian groups to come to the Midwest like that. I mean, there were Asians there before, but just like one or two. You know what I mean? Like, Southeast Asian refugees were the first in the Midwest to make people say, oh, look, Asian people, what do we do? You know what I mean? And so we came from that situation and faced an enormous amount of discrimination. To this day, there's still undercurrents of that. And I got a full scholarship to a private liberal arts college. I started doing poetry because I was educated in the public school system. Yay, teachers, y'all are the best. But I started doing poetry because I joined the speech team in my public high school. And I'm here today because of that. And I'm here to share some poems with you. A lot of my poems, especially recently since I've become a father, and I've been told that war trauma and these traumas can be passed down through our DNA to our children. I've been writing a lot more personal poems recently because now that I'm a daughter to a 9-year-old, I want her to have something in case something happens to me. Unfortunately, I'm sure, as many of you know, there's not a lot of Asian American history in our curriculum. That needs to change. And obviously, not just my story. Obviously, Asian American people have been part of the fabric and the struggle in this country for generations. But my poetry is just one way for me to add to that discussion. So I'm going to read some poems to you today about that. This poem, is about going shopping with my mom when I was a little boy and witnessing something happening to her before I had the words to stick up for her. We went to a grocery store. Actually, it was a craft store. And my mom said we were being overcharged, and the cashier was like, no, you're not. And they got into this argument. And this is a poem about that. The lines are long, and my mom insists that the final amount is wrong. The cashier looks at the receipt and insists that it's right. My mom purses her lips, looks worried, says, it's not right. The entire line of white people behind us groans. My mom won't look back at them. We both know what they're thinking. Small woman with no knowledge of the way things are in America. Though year after year, she makes flowers bloom in the hood, petals in the face of this land that doesn't even want her here. Finally, a manager comes, checks the receipt, and tells the cashier she rang up 22 plants instead of the 2 that we wanted to buy, overcharging us by $40. My mother holds my hand, leads me away without looking back at the line of people who overhear this and gasp, their sympathy won. If only I was old enough to tell them to keep it. It's not my mom's English that's broken. I feel like part of being a refugee poet is just like writing these clapbacks that you wish you had when you were 11 years old. Like you witness the stuff happening to your parents and to you, and you're like, 30 years later, take that. And I think, sometimes when you're taught that you're the other, in this country, not only does it make you angry, I think sometimes you can internalize that and start hating yourself and start believing maybe there is something wrong with me because I'm not white, or I don't speak English, or I'm from another country. And this poem is about one of those times. So back in the day when we first came here, Vietnamese people would gather in kind of a space like this but smaller, and the older people would speak in Vietnamese and dance and celebrate culture, and those of us who are young would go and look for video games. And back then, video games, you had to put a quarter into a machine. You know what I'm talking about, right? Come on. And so this is about one of those times. Who says Asian people can't dance? Have you seen old Vietnamese people? Cha-cha and tango? Like their feet and hips asked to be colonized. You can't handle them, so don't. I'm walking away from them with kids older and taller, blocks away, the promise of video games in some arcade, or maybe the front of a store. I hate Vietnamese people, one of the boys says suddenly, scowl like a blue marbled switchblade. I hate my own people, he laughs, to make sure we get it. I've only got one quarter, so I hold it in my palm and watch the other kids play, including the hater, who puts his quarter into a slot, does his best to control his one life out of 3. I can't remember what game he played or whether I cared that he hated Vietnamese people like me. Like him. Nah, that's a lie. I know I didn't care. I was rooting for him, even after I saw him lose life after life. So I just have a few more poems for you. Since we're talking about language, I'm going to read this new poem. Oh, is that what you're seeing right now? You're seeing me on a big screen, aren't you? I'm so sorry. Can we put like Finding Nemo or something up here for people to? All right, so I'm a refugee from Vietnam, and I was thinking about the word asylum. And so this poem is called Asylum, and it starts with the 2 definitions of the word asylum. Noun, the protection granted by a nation to someone who has left their native country as a political refugee. 2, dated, an institution offering shelter and support to people who are mentally ill. What I mean to say is hundreds of Vietnamese people in a plane devoured by flame at once. Hundreds of fuses or hundreds of wicks on an anniversary, depending on who you ask. What I mean to say is my father fought off muggers, a third his age at the bus stop, his feet uprooted on Minnesota ice. What I mean to say is kids shouted obscenities at my mother as she fixed the damage they did until she straightened her back and yelled back her broken swear words. What I mean to say is my dreams were blue-eyed tongues. What I mean to say is the headlines read, Germany eliminated from World Cup, not South Korea won. What I mean is, love lives in our bones, as does nobody wants you here. What I mean to say is, every word in this language is a refugee. What I mean to say is, deserve got nothing on history. No, I never said any of this. I must be going crazy. I know, it's like, you know, you hire a poet to come to this stuff, and you're gonna get depression. I mean, that's just what we do. I mean, it's how we process all these things that happen to us, is to put it into like artistic form and I don't know, hope it matters somehow. I'm gonna read this poem. All right, so I'm terrified of insects. And I was doing research on on insects because I was living in this apartment that had a bunch of these house centipedes in them. And house centipedes, have you ever seen house centipedes? It's like, they look like mustaches that run really fast. They freak me out, right? And so I did research on them, and I found out that you should tolerate them as much as you can because they eat more harmful insects. And they're often mistaken for a more harmful insect called silverfish, but they're not silverfish. And so I started thinking about being misunderstood and being hated for things that you're not. And so I wrote this poem, Not a Silverfish. A large centipede was in my tub for days. It looked like a prehistoric zipper made of needles, a firecracker with too many fuses. I skipped taking a shower for way too long. An unspoken compromise hoping it would disappear on its own, preferring to be dirty over drowning my fear. Eventually, I trapped it under a container, took it outside while it scrambled like an explosion of exclamation points under that foggy plastic, and I let it go. These centipedes are often mistaken for silverfish. They actually make dinner of them and other more damaging pests. I know what it's like to be mistaken for something else. To feel that the first reaction when a new set of eyes encounters your body is to want to smash you. To wonder what in history made a caterpillar, a ladybug, a ladybug. To know what it's like to be invisible until revealed to be ugly, alien thing, hairy wiggle, whose body tells the only story anyone is willing to hear. When it shook free of my trap, its head made of stepladders, its body a spasm of 100 loose threads of fate, it didn't make a sound, but I swear I could hear it scream that it wanted to travel back in time and rewrite the many veins of possibility that would shape how it would be seen, so that the present could be a place where it could be understood for what it really was. I just have a couple more poems for you. Again, I just want to say how thankful I am to be here, and I'm going to try to end with two poems that are happier. So I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she's really wonderful, and it's really great to be here because I think one thing that's universal among all parents is we just, no matter what, we want things to be better for our child than they were for us, right? Like that's the one thing. And when I was young, I was bullied all the time for my race. And my daughter, it's not like she's getting bullied, but she is getting erased. Like her personhood as an Asian American person is being erased. And I just, whenever I have the opportunity to talk to educators and parents and administrators, I beg and plead you to not erase Asian Americans from the history of this country. It is, like my daughter has shown that she understands things about politics and race, like she talks trash about Donald Trump constantly. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here. Anyway, I don't know, but, which is a good, whatever. But she's able to, like, you know, kind of understand certain things about race and politics and discrimination, but she still doesn't understand that as an Asian American person. She doesn't understand that Asian American people have fought for equality and justice in this country alongside our brothers and sisters who are people of color and indigenous and white and all of that. And so she needs to know that. She needs to know that history. She needs to know that part of the famous grape strikes were started by Asian American people alongside Latino people. She needs to know She needs to know the names of people like Grace Lee Boggs and Yuri Kochiyama, who are part of the black civil rights movements in this country. She needs to know like all of these things. She needs to know that Chinese people helped build the railroads, and then when everything was finished, we were completely excluded from any celebration of that. And so that's my appeal. Please think about that. And with that, I'm going to read this short poem about how my daughter is hope. I know it's so corny, right? You think like, I'm not going to be that dad who's like, my child is the hope of everything, but you become the dad and you're like, oh, my child is the hope of everything. This is all I know. My daughter isn't too cool for me yet. She still wants to hold my hand when we go out in public. She says, hey, Daddy, look, someone spilled their fries. The birds will have plenty to eat. Others will look at her, and instead of seeing her own entire world growing, they will see a box to score, a mark, a meridian, or a border they will want to move. She is drawing me in, and the world around us is slowing off in sheets, the borders barbed against the hands of children, threads of fate frayed by police bullets, the drones of a dirge in a war. We know the words by heart. Leave it to her and those like her then, wanting to stay awake to read just one more page to see how this book or that book ends. Her brain dances ahead of the stories it already knows. When her eyes close, she eclipses her own landscape, leans her cheek against my arm, finally, her breath some kind of recycled future. So my next children's book is an anti-bullying book. It's called My Footprints, and it's based on my daughter. And she doesn't really like it. She thinks it's okay, you know. That's how she feels about like her dad's writing. She's like, yeah, your writing's okay, Dad. Your books are okay. But she supports me because, like, you know, if her dad's books do well, she gets nice stuff. So, you know, if you want to support my daughter's gathering of nice stuff, think about getting that children's book. So I'm, again, I really thank you for spending time with me today. Thank you to everyone at CABE. I hope you have a rest of the good conference, and I'm going to end with this short poem that I think is going to be appropriate. I've talked a lot about struggle. I've talked a lot about self-hate, and Annie talked a little bit about my name, right? Phi took Din Bao, so Phi means swift or flying or fast, right? Tien means sky or heaven, and Bao means treasure. So if you put my name together, it's like swiftly flying gift from heaven, all right? I know. And what's really funny is when I tell Vietnamese people I meet my name, they're like, "Is that your real name?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And they're like, "That's not your stage name?" I'm like, "No." And they're like, "You didn't give yourself that name?" I'm like, "My Vietnamese is not good enough to give myself a cool name like that." And so I asked a Vietnamese woman once, I'm like, you know, because she was stunned, and I was like, what do you think? And she's like, well, it would be like, that's the type of name where if there was like 70s kung fu movies with a Vietnamese person in it, that would be their name, like flying from heaven, like, you know. But you know, it's funny because when I was a kid, I didn't want that name because nobody could pronounce it, right? Like, you know, nobody wanted to pronounce it, so I wanted to change my name to something more pronounceable, like Paul or Bob or Robert, you know? Because no one could pronounce it, my teachers couldn't pronounce it, my classmates couldn't pronounce it. And in fact, when we were sworn in as American citizens, I don't know if you know this, but when you're sworn in as a citizen, you have to pay to change your name, but you get a one-time name change for free. When you become a citizen, they let you change your name if you want for free. And so my dad told me this, and I was like, okay, I'm going to change my name to Paul or Bob. I was really going to do it. And then something happened. I don't know if like the sudden anger or racial contrarianness or like a time machine version of my older self came back, was like, don't do it. Because something in that little boy said, I'm not going to change my name. I don't know what it was. And so I wrote this poem. It's called Ego Tripping as Self-Defense Mechanism for refugee kids who got their names clowned on. My given name, Dien Bao, translates to treasure from heaven. An immediate reason for me being uncipherable, untranslatable, the moment it stung unfamiliar tongues, so soon after hello. I would finally like to thank my parents for what I once thought of as an unpronounceable curse that I would have loved to bleach. Because everyone who has ever addressed me, from the bullies to the crushes to the haters, has had no choice but to call me a treasure. Thank you. Have a good conference.
Reminder, Bao Phi will be signing books in this room immediately after this session. This marks the end of today's session, which would not have been possible without the generous contributions of our platinum-level sponsors, Google, Latino 24/7 Media Group, Velazquez Press. Let's give them a big CABE thank you again. We also want to thank our fabulous interpretation team, Cesar Vargas, Patricia Juarez, and our CABE staff team members, Karen Umeres and Griselda Perez. Have a powerful learning and networking day.